Emet-Selch of the 3rd seat is my new favorite graveyard spellslinger. Oh yes, that's a thing now. Graveyard spellslinging. In this video I'm going to talk about what makes him so good, what his secret ability is that flies under the radar, and you will of course leave with a shiny new deck that you can inflict upon your friends. Along the way you'll learn how I think, as I teach you all about deck building from my 30 years of Magic experience. You should leave with more knowledge to help you perfect your own decks in just the way you want them. You know, give a man a fish versus teach a man to fish, and all of that. This 4-mana Dimir commander combines some of my favorite things in Magic. I am a greedy Magic player at heart who loves nothing more than generating tons of value through card advantage. It's therefore unsurprising that I love recycling and getting value from my graveyard in any way that I can. In that vein, it should also be unsurprising that Mirren was my very first commander. This recycling ability, by effectively giving all instants and sorceries in our graveyard flashback, was the first thing that drew me to him. He also makes our spells cheaper to cast, and something that I love almost as much as card advantage is cheating spells in for less than their intended mana costs. These two things together meant that it was only a matter of time before I tried to build the sexy graveyard man. Now the obvious catch here is that we can only do our recycling whenever an opponent loses life. Fortunately, that's something that happens an awful lot in a game of Commander, and even if it didn't, as you'll soon see, there are many good ways to do that. His power and toughness don't really matter because if he's seeing combat action, something has gone very wrong. So we already know that Emmet will allow us to recycle spells from our graveyard, and he makes those spells cheaper, both of which are very powerful abilities. But the thing that really stands out to me from a uniqueness perspective is the far less obvious part of his toolkit. When his ability triggers from our opponents losing life, it overrides general timing rules and allows us to play sorceries at instant speed. Card advantage and cost reduction are great, but when it comes to whimsy, this part of his ability really stands out to me a lot more. So okay, I now knew that I wanted to build the sexy graveyard man, but how? Whenever I'm brewing a new deck like this, I like to start the process by looking at the commander and envisaging the endgame board state or how I'm hoping to win, and then working backwards. Everything in my deck should in some way facilitate that. In this case, I wasn't exactly sure which win conditions I wanted to use, but one card that came to mind was Fandaniel, a card I've been wanting to use since I first opened him in the Final Fantasy set. If I have a graveyard full of spells and pair this with some way of clearing the board, he can be a real game-ending threat. The endgame board state I wanted to reach is one where I've got tons of instants and sorceries in my graveyard and have general control over the game. From that point, ideally I can aim to win in ways that synergize with all my instants and sorceries. So if I then think about what I want the deck to do, I definitely want the vast majority of the deck to be filled with instants and sorceries. That much is a given. And given my goal is a board state where I have control, I think the deck is going to want a variety of ways to remove problematic things. To help with this and also to protect our commander, which is critically important to our game plan, a reasonable amount of Countermagic will also be good. Given how much value we get from having stuff in our graveyard, any form of surveil, mill, or looting will also be highly beneficial. And if a card can provide other value in our deck whilst also having that ability, it's going to be highly prioritized. Then I think there's two more things that we're going to need. The first is ways to trigger life loss, allowing us to cast spells on others' turns, and the second is obviously win conditions. At this point in the build, I have no clue what those win conditions will be, but my mind goes towards any type of spellcraft ability or ability that triggers off of instants or sorceries or non-creature spells being cast. If you're new here, I often use a character sheet as a way to narrow down what I want my deck to do, because a good deck can only really facilitate about 5 to 6 main things or buckets of cards. It'll look a little bit like this, and there are links to the video about that and my other key technique, the 33 card deck, down below the like button. So this gives me a lot of strong direction to start pulling in cards and building a version 1 list. Between looking at cards and some early tests, I had two really important realizations. The first was about ramp. I added in ramp early in my brewing process because being able to play my commander earlier with mana up to protect him seemed like a good idea. Plus, more mana in a deck that wants to cast multiple spells in a turn cycle seemed like something we'd also want. But fitting ramp in the deck proved to be really difficult. In early testing, I realized that I didn't really care about casting Emmet until I had a bunch of stuff in my graveyard, which typically was after turn 5 or 6, by which point I had more than enough mana to cast him as long as I was hitting my mana drops. If I then pair this with the fact that he has built-in ramp once he's in play for the other cards that we want to cast, it makes the case for ramp in this particular deck pretty weak. So I cut the ramp, but in doing so created an entirely different problem that I then needed to fix, but more on that in just a bit. The second realization was how much mill absolutely sucked when compared to surveil or drawing and discarding. I had a test game where I milled every single one of my win conditions in my deck in the first few turns. Bad luck to be sure, but it taught me a really good lesson. Whilst less extreme, other scenarios saw me milling key lands and other key cards that I needed while leaving tons of instants and sorceries in my hand. Where initially I was excited to use cards like Milliken or Deranged Assistant in this deck, this made me remove all instances of mill and find other solutions for getting cards into the graveyard. Friendship ended with mill, now surveil is new best friend. Speaking of best friends, I make videos like this that'll help you think differently about Magic and Commander. Videos that will help you build better decks, play better, and ultimately have more fun. If you're enjoying this, give the like button a big old lick because it really helps the video get traction so that other people can see it too. And if you want more like this, subscribe to make sure that my next banger gets delivered directly into your eyeballs. With all this said, let's have a look at the deck and where my choices ended up. I'm not going to explain every card, but rather look at groups of cards that reflect my thinking with a strong focus on why I made these decisions. We'll go left to right, starting with Countermagic. This is a theme that's carried throughout my choices, but anything that synergizes with the graveyard is exactly what I want. Circular Logic, Countervailing Winds, and Swallowed by Leviathan are all great here. Logic can be discarded to save Vohar and then get cast for its madness cost. Winds can instead be cycled, adding some flexibility, and Leviathan surveils for us. All three cost 3 mana, which when reduced if cast from a graveyard is now 1 mana. This is a sweet spot for many of our spells, though unfortunately many of our other counterspells have double blue pips. Next up is a card type that I only added pretty late in the brewing process, and that's draw engines. One thing that a control deck like ours wants is tons and tons of card advantage, and even though Emet greatly helps with that already, an engine like T-Vol's Judgment can be the difference between dying and running away with the game. Fang, Neardiv, and Secrets of the Dead all do the same thing, drawing us cards when cards leave our graveyard if we flash them back with Emet, and Judgment can also make us zombies or treasures. A special call out for Enhanced Surveillance here, which is an absolute banger. Surveilling for an additional 2 cards feels so much better than it sounds on paper, and we can even save our graveyard from Bajuka Bog if we get caught out. When it comes to the mana base, there are a few important things to note. I hate lands that come into play tapped in most cases, but we have almost no turn 1 play, so the opportunity cost for an opening hand with a tapped land here is pretty minimal. Some of these tapped lands are really helpful to our deck in other ways, like Leech-Ridden Swamp or Piranha Marsh that can ping our opponents for a flashback trigger, or Salundi Vision Waterlogged Teachings of Lorien Revealed that can be surveilled and then flashed back by Emet from the graveyard. I think you're either going to love or hate the life loss sources I chose, but hear me out. Many of our life loss sources, be they cards like Blightspeaker, Cryptolith Fragment, or Vohar, are only going to get us a single trigger per turn cycle, but critically, they allow us to control and decide exactly when that cast trigger is. I considered a bunch of cards that trigger more regularly of certain requirements, like opponents' creatures dying or creatures entering the battlefield or casting non-creature spells, but the problem with all of these is the lack of control. Having someone play a game-ending creature threat that you can't remove or counter because the life loss source you have in play only triggers on non-creature spells really sucked, and the same is true for someone removing your commander and you can't respond because your Blood Artist ain't doing shit. We are, after all, a control deck, and I much prefer us having control of our game plan as much as we possibly can. There are some cards that trigger off of casts like Rug of Smothering or Sutimp, but these are the minority. We have a lot of looting effects, mostly because of how much we want to get stuff into our graveyard. Cards that are grayed out are cards that are in other categories that also have looting abilities for us in addition to their other effects. These cards will fit into one of 2 categories. Single-use cards that either surveil or draw and discard, like Dire Sight, Forbidden Alchemy, or Thirst for Discovery, or repeated use ones, like Ledger Shredder, Likeness Looter, or Vohar. Similar to the conversation we had around Countermagic, most of these are 3 casting costs or less, and they all have a single pip. They effectively become 1 mana cost if flashed back via Emet. So I know I said we didn't want ramp, and that's true for the most part, but Bender's, Waterskin, and Sol Ring are too good to pass up. The Waterskin giving colored mana is critically important, because so many of our spells are a single colored mana pip when in the graveyard. Cryptolith Fragment, while primarily in the deck for a life loss trigger, is also a mana rock too. Our removal in the deck is pretty simple. Lots of targeted removal and a few spells to deal with wide boards, like Washout, Consuming Tide, or Evacuation. The win conditions are the part of the deck that I am probably the least happy with. If you know my Golbears deck, I really wanted a similar 0 to 100 style win con like that deck has, but I struggled to find anything. Fandaniel certainly can do that when paired with Evacuation, and Rise of the Tides if paired with Wonder can certainly do a whole lot of work too if cast at the end step before we untap and take our turn. Outside of these, our win conditions are far more incremental, with cards like Lord of the Nazgûl, Shark Typhoon, and Talrand providing more gradual building win conditions. I didn't include cards like Chromehost Seed Shark because of the intense mana requirement to turn the incubated tokens into creatures, and the fact that most of our spells cost around 3 mana, so the payoff is actually quite low. Shark Typhoon barely makes the cut because of the same reason. If you know of any absolute bangers that could fit into our win condition category here, please let me know either down in the comments or in the base deck department Discord. Something that I realized pretty late in the testing process, but that's really important, is considering reactive versus proactive plays we have available, especially in the early turns of the game. I think having agency in Magic is one of the biggest contributing factors to whether we have fun. And by agency, I mean that regardless of whether we win or lose, that we have something to do every turn that either impacts the game in a meaningful way or that furthers our game plan. In most decks, and especially at lower powers, turn 1 is a throwaway turn, and turn 2 is often filled with a ramp spell, be it something like 3 Visits or a Mana Rock. In this deck, however, the lack of ramp meant that I needed to make sure that I had stuff I could proactively cast. I had plenty of interactive 2-cost spells, but Feed the Swarm or Negate weren't going to do very much when the entire table goes Mana Rock Pass. Turn 3 and beyond, we have tons of spells that we can proactively cast, but I had to go back and ensure that I had 11 or more 2-cost spells that I could cast proactively, so that it didn't feel like my game started on turn 3. Cards like Dogger Detector, Ripples of Undeath, or Voha all feel really good to play on curve, as do once-off effects like Start the TARDIS or Curate. Thinking about this and addressing the problem made the deck way more enjoyable to pilot. When it comes to piloting the deck, this is largely a reactive control deck, and where we are looking to incrementally build up value over time. It's for that reason that this deck probably fits best in Bracket 2 and can probably hang in Bracket 3 to a degree in its current form. But if you're hoping for this to be a reliable Bracket 3 list, you're going to need to throw some upgrades and some money at it. The deck works so well in Bracket 2 because the turns between say turn 6 and 10 when a game usually ends in Bracket 2 gives us time to build up our win conditions. In our early game, our only real focus is on hitting our land drops and filling out our graveyard. This means that a good opening hand for us is land and spells that either surveil or draw and discard. Given the amount of card selection in our deck, we will draw into all the other stuff that we need as long as we have those. Having a draw engine or a source of life loss is obviously also fine, but I wouldn't keep a bad hand just because we have one of those pieces. The goal by the mid game, which is about turn 6ish, is to reach a point where we have a life loss source in play and can play Emmet and have mana up for a counter spell to protect him. We may have had to use some of our interaction before that to make sure someone didn't get too far ahead, but that's absolutely fine, because it would then be in our graveyard waiting to be used again. Once we're in that position, all we want to do is more of the same, dealing with critical problems and staying alive, and if we don't have to interact, using our surveil looting to keep our graveyard full. At some point we're likely going to want to play a win condition, likely in the form of a token generator. That way all of our spells will create creatures that we can then use defensively if need be, but alternatively and more importantly, to attack and end the game. Beyond that, playing the deck is pretty simple as long as you remember that keeping Emmet alive is our primary goal. The deck can operate perfectly fine without him, but is obviously far better when he's alive. To give you a practical example of the deck playing out, here is a game that I Goldfish in testing. I mulliganed once and saw an opening hand with 3 lands and a source of card selection in Likeness Looter. I also had proactive turn 2 and 3 plays, so I was very happy with this hand. Turn 1, I draw a land and play the tapped land, because getting rid of the tapped land early is worth more than the 1 life loss trigger later, especially as I have a Rug of Smothering in hand. Turn 2, I draw Confounding Riddle and play the Looter. Turn 3, I draw and discard with the Looter, discarding a swamp, and I play the Bender's Waterskin. On turn 4, I obviously use the Looter, and I also play a Confounding Riddle, keeping Voha. I also play the Into the Royal in an assumed possible defensive play. On turn 5, I draw a Neardiv and set up for an Emmet situation with both Rug and the Neardiv in play. And on turn 6, I play Emmet with the Waterskin that's going to untap on the next untap step, so I now have a graveyard full of spells to cast, either proactively to get more cards in my graveyard or reactively with Countermagic or Interaction. From this point, all I'm doing is digging for my win conditions, filling my graveyard, and keeping myself and Emmet alive so I can try to win. I brewed this as a very budget-focused list, with many of my card choices being made with that in mind. If you want to upgrade the deck, I'm going to let you do some thinking of your own, but I think the easiest upgrade are typical good cards or staples in the Dimir color pairing. Things like Demonic Tutor, Fierce Guardianship, Force of Will, or Gifts Ungiven are all great game-changer additions. Deadly Relic, Soul Shatter, and Foul the Profane are all decent removal options that could also be added within Bracket 2. I thought about Professor Onyx, that could be a good addition, but she was too expensive and I didn't add her because she also felt a little bit slow. And the last card I would probably definitely add is Leela. Her tokens are small, but the goat effect will be incredibly useful. At $30 though, she didn't make the cut for this budget list. And that is my take on the sexy Graveyard Man. As always, I hope you found this useful, and I'd love to hear your takes on any cards you think that would be good for this list or that I may have missed, either down in the comments or in the base deck department Discord. If you want to support what I do, smash up the like button or head over to my Patreon, and a big thank you for everyone that supports me over there. If you want some more personal tailored help, or you're just horribly rich and you want to jettison some money, you can find that over on Coffee, and all of which you can find the links to down below the like button. And last but definitely not least, if you like this, go and check out some of my other deck videos that you might like even more. And as always, thank you for being here.